Welcome to this video where we'll be taking a look at the while loop in C++. Right, so the while loop is one of the three loops we have in programming or C++. So we have a while loop, do while loop, and a for loop. And loops are basically there to help us execute repetitive tasks, right? We want to execute things that will be repeating for a sequence of numbers. Sometimes you might know the exact number of times you would want to repeat some particular statement of code, or sometimes they will depend on a condition. And so today we are diving right into the while loop. Right, so the while loop, first thing to talk about will be it being a pretest loop. When you say a pretest loop, that means this is going to check some form of expression before it executes the statement inside its body. Right, so let's look at how the flowchart of the while loop is. So this is basically the flowchart of a while loop. We have a start from the top, then there is an expression that will be checked. And if the expression is true, you can go inside the loop body and then execute the statements you have till the point you have your expression being false. Then you can break out of the while loop and go to the next code after your while loop. All right, so what do we have next? We have the general format of a while loop. So with a while loop, all you need is your while, your expression, and your statement. Right, this will be a very simple format. So what we have here, usually if you want to have just one line of code for something like a while loop, you do not require curly braces here or at the end. That is if you have only one line of code inside your structure, right? So we have this other format where you can have multiple lines of code inside your while loop, and in that case your statement will have to be inside the curly braces, right? So you have your while, the expression that will be checking on every iteration, right? So then you can execute your body of code. So that would just be it for the while loop. So we can dive into our code blocks and see how we can apply this. So first thing is we are going to use the while loop to print out some repetitive sequence to our console, right? So let's say we want to say hello iteration 1, hello iteration 2, hello iteration 3 to a very certain number, then we can stop our loop. All right, so we are going to declare a variable as our counter, and then we will be incrementing that inside our while loop statement, and we can use that to be checking for our expression. So how do we do that? Let's say int, then we can say something like num, let's give it a number 0, then end this, then we can say wow, our number is less than, let's say 5, then we can execute some form of statement to the console. So let's just say hello from iteration, and we are going to have the num here. All right, then we can end the line here. Right, so we can have this, and this is going to be printing hello from iteration, the value of our variable. So what is going to happen when we run this code? There is something called infinite loops, and this sometimes can break your code. So we have something called counters. and counters, we use them to increment our values so that we can get to a certain condition where we break out of the loop. All right, so let's run this and see what I'm talking about. Right, we do not have any counter here, so this code is an infinite loop. All right, and it keeps on running and running and running because the variable num is always 0, which is true for the expression we use where num is less than 5. Of course, 0 is less than 5, so our loop will keep on running and running and running without any ending. So we are going to stop this and introduce what we call a counter. All right, so we can use the variable itself and do num plus plus. We've learned about the increment operator from our previous video. So this is going to take our value and then increment it by 1 each time the loop runs, right? So we want to see hello from iteration 0. Then the next thing we are going to do is increment our num variable by 1. So the next time it comes to check for the expression, it is going to be 1. Is 1 less than 5, which is true. So we are going to execute this line of code, and this time around you see 1. So it will run till it gets to 4, and 4 is also true. So we execute this, then it will increment this to 5. So it comes and check again. Is 5 less than 5? Which is no. It's a false thing. So we will break out of this loop, and then we can output a statement that we are out of the while loop. Right. So let's run this and we get to see how this works. So we have hello from iteration 0, which is going to be the first iteration. We have hello from iteration 1, hello from iteration 2, 3, 4. Then we break out, all right, because when it gets to 5, 5 is not less than 5. So that makes the expression false. Then we break out of the while loop. Then we can go to the next statement of code, which in this case we are out of the while loop, right? So that sounds cool. Yes, so what can we do again? So I mentioned about having just one line of code where there wouldn't be any need for you to do this, right? So in the case where we had an infinite loop, we can just do this, all right? And then the code will be executing and executing without breaking out of the while loop. So this is a valid infinite loop, all right? So we can have this at the end, and this will never be printed because our while loop is never going to be false for us to break out of it to go to the next statement. So we can run this and we are not getting any errors. The only thing is we are expecting an infinite loop, all right? So the loop keeps on running because num is always 0, all right? So there is no way we can break out of this loop and then come to the next line of code outside the while loop, right? So let's end this. All right, then again we can also try something out where we can say we are going to print numbers from 1 to 20, right, using the while loop. So we can leave this here and clean this. So we already have our int num equals, this time around we use 1, and we are going to print them to 20. But this time around we are printing from 1 to 20. So we are going to make this expression less than or equal to, right? There can be a situation where you forget what you are doing and then use num equals 20. Whenever you use one equal to sign in C++ or a lot of programming languages, it's actually assigning the value to the right hand value to the left hand variable, right? So this looks like an expression instead of putting this value inside this variable, instead of maybe if you wanted to check if they are the same. So if you want to check if the left hand side is equal to the right hand side, you have to do equal to. So you can do while the number is equal to 20. You can be executing whatever statement you want to have in your while loop, right? Yes, so this time around we are doing less than or equal to 20, and when it's less than or equal to 20, we just want to output the number. So see out num, you can add some space, yes, and then don't forget to increase your variable so that we can break out of the loop, right? So we can do num plus plus to increase it after each iteration. So when we run this, we expect to see numbers from 1 to 20. And then the last thing we want to see is we are out of the while loop. So let's run this. And then we have numbers 1 through to 20. Then we are out of the while loop. You can actually put this on a new line. Again. And then let's run this again. Then we can get a better output for our code. So 1 through to 2, 20. Then we are out of the loop as expected. So assuming we having this range from 1 to 20, we just want to be printing even numbers. How do we go about that? So that introduces us to the if statement. And having to take a while loop lesson, you should already have the understanding on if statements, right? So let's take this away, and then we can do it a little bit from a better place. So this time around, inside our while loop, while we are checking the numbers from 0 to 20, we want to be printing out only even numbers. And how do we know if a number is an even number? So every even number divided by 2 has to have a remainder of 0, right? And how do we check for remainders in programming or C++? We use the modulus operator, which is the percentage sign. And the number, the variable modulus 2 should be equal to 0, right? And if it is not equal to 0, then it's probably not an even number, right? So bear in mind, in this case, we are focusing on integers or whole numbers, right? So let's dive into it. We can do inside our while loop. Of course, it has to be, the if has to be inside the while loop, all right? Because you have a range of numbers and you are checking something out of, all right? So if our num modulus 2 is equal to 0, all right? So then again, it takes us back to checking if the right hand side is equal to the left hand side, all right? So you don't do just one equal to, that would be an assignment. You do equal to two of them, all right? So if num modulus 2 equal 0, we want to print out. Remember, we are going to have just one line of code for this output, right? So you can choose to omit the curly braces for the if statement. So let's give some space here. This is the if. All right. So this is just an if statement that is printing out even numbers, right? So let's run this and see how it goes. All right, nothing is coming. What are we doing wrong? We have int num. Of course, this is a very good thing to happen to us. So we forgot about our counter, right? So let's add our counter. So it's definitely going to be somewhere here. So we can say num plus plus. All right. So num plus plus will be incrementing our value, all right, by one every time the loop runs, right? So let's run this again. And this time around, we expect to have exactly even numbers from 1 to 20. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and it goes to 20. And then we break out of the loop, right? So this is just one line of code inside the if statement. All right, you can choose to omit your braces, or you can still have it here. So I'll leave it like this. All right, so we will be ending this lesson here. Make sure you do understand this very well. Try out some examples, and then I'll catch you up in the next video where we are going to try our hands on an example where we are required to make use of the while loop.